I have known longer, I think, than anyone in recorded sound.
Oh my goodness.
Which is a frightening thought. I used to hang out with Cary at Jazzman Records before I knew Cary, right? And today he's going to speak on one of his passions in life, the LA Dodgers. Yeah. Cary, what can I say about Cary that
I wrote for you.
That he wrote for me? Here we are. Mr. Ginell has been long a member of ARSC. He's been the ARSC president, the vice president, conference chair. He sat on any number of committees. And as far as music is concerned, he knows it all. Last November, he was awarded a gold medal with the Will Rogers Memorial Award for a documentary on Western swing. He's the author of a frightening 16 books, many of which have been recognized by ARSC. And today he is going to present a story that was absolutely new to me when he told me about it. Restoring Dignity Through Music, Harry Belafonte's The Long Road to Freedom, Mr. Ginell.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. I'll return the favor someday. Well, the recording session took 10 years to complete, interrupted by one of the most tumultuous assassinations of the 20th century. It took another 30 years for the recordings to be released. And when they were, it coincided with the most tragic single day in American history. Nearly a half-century in the making, Harry Belafonte's The Long Road to Freedom was the crowning achievement of his 5 decades as a recording artist, a sweeping study of the history of black music in America. It became his magnum opus, a monumental and essential achievement that changed the way we listen to traditional music in a way that does not exploit but clarifies our understanding of the history of traditional black music styles, yet is barely acknowledged today. The Long Road to Freedom began in 1949, when Harry Belafonte started his career as a jazz singer at the Royal Roost, the Midtown Manhattan nightclub that was the home of bebop and progressive jazz. Belafonte, a struggling actor fighting racism in the entertainment industry, was initially hired as an intermission singer, but soon progressed to being offered a 5-week engagement. One recording emerged from his time at the Roost, which was released on the club's eponymous label, with the prescient slogan, "Music of the Future," written in the italicized typeface on the label. When the Royal Roost closed, he moved on to the newly opened Birdland, where he performed with some of the great bopsters of the 1950s, including Charlie Parker, Stan Getz, and Lenny Tristano. Belafonte's early recordings showed him trying to find his voice, first as a jazz vocalist and then singing pop standards a la Billy Eckstine. When neither advanced his career, he declared he was through singing pop music, citing the insincere lyrics as well as his constant battles with racism at Southern nightclubs. In the spring of 1951, he opened a small cafe in Greenwich Village with 2 friends. For several months, they cooked short-order meals while Belafonte explored folk music, his new passion, at the Library of Congress. In his spare time, he attended folk music concerts at the Village Vanguard, becoming enthralled with the repertoires of performers like Burl Ives, Josh White, Big Bill Brunzi, and 2 major influences, activist Paul Robeson, who became a mentor both musically and politically, and choirmaster Leonard Paur, whose infantry chorus entertained troops during World War II with concerts of Negro spirituals. Belafonte reinvented himself as a folk singer, eschewing the customary guitar appendage, preferring to use his hands to communicate the lyrics of the songs he sang, a result of his training as a dramatic actor. In 1951, he landed a tryout at the Village Vanguard, where he was rewarded with a 17-week contract that was extended into 1952. With his popularity gaining momentum, Belafonte was signed to a recording contract with RCA Victor. Success was slow but steady, and soon he was receiving rave notices from New York music critics. His records sold modestly, though, since RCA was marketing him as a pop singer performing traditional folk songs, ladling his records with lush orchestras and vocal choirs, much as Gordon Jenkins did with the Weavers at Decca Records. It was around this time that Belafonte got the idea to explore the history of black music in America, a concept he came up with while appearing on Broadway in the musical revue John Murray Anderson's Almanac, after Anderson saw his act at the Village Vanguard. Belafonte would win a Tony for his performance. And with his Broadway success, he was able to wrest creative control from RCA, making his first long-playing record in 1954. Much of the material on the album included guitarist Millard Thomas as his sole accompanist. Belafonte's next success was another Broadway-styled revue called Three for Tonight, in which he co-starred with the husband and wife team of Gower and Marge Champion. While on a 15-week tour with the company, he began developing an idea for an anthology exploring Negro folk music. His original plan was for a tour using a company of 50 performers, actor Charles Lawton as MC, readings from famous black writers, speeches and papers by black activists, plus songs, scenes from plays, and dance numbers. Meanwhile, he released his second LP, which featured songs from Three for Tonight, with a special emphasis on chain gang songs of Southern prisons. But it was his third album of mento songs from Jamaica that changed everything. The album title, Calypso, was a misnomer, since Calypso came not from Jamaica, but from nearby Trinidad and Tobago. The album was supposed to be the first in a series of records in which Belafonte would explore African-derived musical traditions from around the world, but its overwhelming success came unexpected and at a cost. Calypso triggered a nationwide craze, becoming the first long-playing record by a popular artist to sell 1 million copies, and it threatened to engulf Belafonte. The Calypso album's surprising success thwarted Belafonte's plans for his serious study of black music. He was treated like a novelty act, as newly formed fan clubs idolized his good looks and mock Caribbean accent. Talent agents encouraged him to wear blousy shirts, carrying baskets of bananas, demanding he sing his hits Deo and Jamaica Farewell. By 1957, his success even rivaled that of his RCA label mate, Elvis Presley. Over the next 5 years, Belafonte fiercely resisted being typecast as a calypso singer and recorded a stunning series of LPs exploring black musical traditions such as blues, spirituals, and chain gang songs. In the back of his mind, however, he was still looking to work on his Negro anthology. Finally, in 1961, he made his move. In developing his anthology, Belafonte had a willing partner in RCA Victor president George Merrick, but the label did not agree with Belafonte's concept of a multi-disc box set consisting of 10 individually themed sides. The 10 sides would examine different periods in black music history, beginning with traditional chants from Africa, progressing to religious songs and spirituals, and including the antebellum period, the Civil War, Reconstruction, minstrelsy, the blues, chain gang and prison songs, work songs, gospel, and more. In early 1961, Belafonte seized control of his recording career by expanding the reach of Belafonte Enterprises, a corporation he founded 4 years earlier to produce motion pictures, publish music he recorded, promote his concerts, and sponsor new up-and-coming folk performers. As a result, his future albums would be produced by this company, with RCA Victor handling distribution. Leonard Paur signed on as conductor and arranger and also author of a book on the history of Negro folk music, which would be published by Reader's Digest in conjunction with RCA's box set. Belafonte and Paur interviewed blacks in the South, much as folklorists John and Alan Lomax had done. But instead of recording in the field, they brought the music back to New York, where Paur rearranged songs to be performed by his own choir and vocal soloists selected by Belafonte.
It's a man by the name of Leonard Paur, who came out of black culture and who had the intellectual as well as the artistic capacity to notate and to put this music on paper. It's very close to the sounds of its origin. And we called upon the greatest voices that could be found in America to make up the most powerful choral ensemble that we could find. And Leonard Paur handpicked these people who auditioned from all over the country, who came to be part of this choir. The soloists who would sing were picked not only for their musical power and their musical gift, but also picked for the uniqueness of the sound of the individual voices.
The soloists they chose reflected the best that roots music offered during the early 1960s, including jazz singers Gloria Lynn and Joe Williams, folk icons Sonny Terry, Brownie McGhee, and Leon Bibb, and actor-singer Valentine Pringle. Instrumentalists also traversed a variety of root styles, including guitarists Ernie Calabria, Walter Rame, and Alan Shackman, banjoist Danny Barker, flutist Hubert Laws, and in the children's choir, Irene Escalera, who would become Irene Cara, star of the 1980 film Fame, and Giancarlo Esposito, who decades later would play the role of Gus Fring in the hit series Breaking Bad. The sessions were held at Webster Hall, a cavernous building constructed in 1886 at 119 East 11th Street that initially hosted private dances for wealthy black New Yorkers. It later became a meeting spot for union rallies and speeches by political activists, including the notorious anarchist Emma Goldman. After a fire threatened to destroy the building in 1930, it was restored to its former splendor, becoming the site for an annual Greenwich Village costume ball. Another fire occurred in 1949, but then in 1953, RCA purchased the building, which became their main East Coast recording venue. It was here where Harry Belafonte began recording his anthology in 1961.
Your daddy went a hunting, and he took him on a shotgun. And long
the way in which that hall had been built acoustically as a popular dance hall downtown New York for people to gather around, the way in which it had been built was for architectural design acoustically perfect. So we could come and set up instruments, and by placing instruments in different locations around the hall, got the right distance, the right separation between voice and orchestra and other sounds that we wanted. And yet when you listen to the values technically captured by these technicians then who had a tremendous genius for how to adjust and to move sound around in space, and how did we minimize the loss and how could we maximize the gain by bringing it under a controlled environment.
All during the 1960s, sessions for the anthology continued, usually twice a year, whenever they were able to coordinate Belafonte and Paur's schedules. In 1968, Belafonte Enterprises reverted production of Belafonte's recordings back to RCA, but Belafonte was permitted to continue his sessions for the anthology. His expansive musical appetite was reflected by the scope of material used: tribal chants and shouts, children's games, songs from slavery, and spirituals of the Underground Railroad. In addition to the musicians and singers, Belafonte and Paur employed a unit of West African drummers, an African children's chorus, and members of Belafonte's own vocal choir, the Belafonte Folk Singers, which he formed in 1957, and who had been appearing on his albums as well as performing on their own. A key resource for Belafonte was gospel and folk singer Bessie Jones, an Alan Lomax subject at one time, who toured for years with the Georgia Sea Island Singers. Jones was especially valuable for her own collecting history, something that proved extremely invaluable to the project. In the meantime, Belafonte kept up his busy RCA Victor recording schedule, with sessions occurring during the peak years of the folk music revival. His LPs ran the gamut of folk music styles, from bluesy big band versions of traditional country and folk music to children's songs, protest songs from the US and South Africa, Greek songs, and even a mambo-flavored return to calypso. But by 1968, Belafonte's LP sales had slowed to a crawl. The folk boom of the early 60s was over, as its young college audiences turned first to folk rock and then to psychedelia. RCA decided that Belafonte, now approaching 40, might have a greater appeal to middle-aged audiences, so folk music was left behind as he returned to what he had fled from years before, ballads layered with lush orchestras. In January 1968, amidst the tumult of Vietnam and the upcoming presidential election, the LP Belafonte recorded was a record of love songs. For the activist-minded singer, it's hard to imagine him recording anything more antithetical to the era. What his fans didn't know was that on the side, he was continuing sessions for his long-anticipated anthology. On April 1st, 1968, he appeared as a vocalist on the anthology for the first time.
This place brings back a lot of memories. Almost all of my early life as a musical artist was spent in this place. Over there used to be the recording booth, a simple little box, not a lot of electronic paraphernalia because we didn't have a lot. One microphone. Everything was mono.
In April and May 1968, Belafonte completed 10 titles, beginning on April 1st and 3rd with 3 spirituals, backed by Paur's vocal choir. The day after Belafonte completed the 3rd spiritual, his close friend Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis. Belafonte immediately flew to Memphis to be with King's widow and children for a viewing and memorial march. At its conclusion, he provided his private jet for Coretta Scott King and King's immediate family to fly to Atlanta for the funeral services, which were held on April 9th. 2 days later, Belafonte was back at Webster Hall to continue the sessions. In the days of slavery, the hours before midnight on New Year's Eve were spent singing songs of praise and thanksgiving for having survived the past year. A watcher was assigned to look for the first rays of sunlight at dawn in hopes that the new year would bring better times. How Belafonte was able to perform this jubilant watcher's shout just days after the murder of his friend is a tribute to his professionalism as an artist. The anthology's subject matter documented the lives of Black Americans in a stunning array of settings. Belafonte and Paur brought alive not just the songs themselves, but the contexts in which they were created, even including sound effects to enhance the authenticity. The songs reflected the everyday lives of blacks in rural as well as urban settings, from street cries, ring games, and blues to sunrise hollers, hoedowns, and lullabies. On this song, sung by a railroad gang laying rails, Belafonte even brought in an anvil and hammer to represent the striking of the wrought iron railroad spikes.
All right, come on back and get another one. Walk up, walk across the car. Inside man, step back. Outside men move up good and strong. Don't want no slackers, don't want no step backers. All right, steady yourself, head high, throw it away. Good on. I heard it, I heard it, I heard it. Ring that time.
Good eye. I heard it, 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 I heard it. Ring that time. What I said?
Woo! Come on back and get another one.
The final session took place on April 27, 1971, bringing an end to 10 years of recording. But the project fell apart when RCA's association with Reader's Digest was terminated. Belafonte wanted the anthology to be used as a teaching tool in schools, but with its only sponsor's exit, RCA suggested that the box instead be broken up into 5 individual releases. Belafonte responded by saying it would be like asking Beethoven to cut his Ninth Symphony in half. With no distribution partner, the anthology was doomed. In 1972, George Merrick, its most eminent champion, left the label. On May 23, 1972, a memo by RCA's chief of artists and repertoire, Herman Diaz Jr., who had produced the Calypso sessions in 1955, along with Belafonte's recordings of Deo and Jamaica Farewell, relegated the anthology to RCA's vaults. Belafonte stuck around long enough to record one last solo LP in 1973 for the label, but his contract was not renewed. The anthology remained in the vaults, unseen, unheard, and forgotten, for 27 years. In the fall of 1999, Alex Miller was an executive working for Sony Classical at the height of the sales of the Titanic soundtrack album. Columbia Legacy had been a successful arm of Sony for its series of reissues exploiting its deep historical catalog, and RCA BMG hired him to do the same for their company. He was especially interested in roots and black music, and so one day, after entering the word Negro into the searchable database, he was startled to discover dozens of reels of tape of something called the Anthology of Negro Folk Music. After hearing Belafonte's voice on one of the tapes, he called Belafonte Enterprises and left a message for the singer, now 73 years old, to return his call. Some days later, Miller's phone rang. He picked it up, and a hoarse voice on the other end said, "So you found the anthology." Momentarily stunned, Miller finally found his voice. "Mr. Belafonte? Call me Harry." The two met and decided to resurrect the project for Miller's label, Buddha Records.
In September '99, we had not heard any of the music yet, and we didn't know what the condition of the tapes were, or really anything about the project other than there was a project called the Anthology of Negro Folk Music. It was created by Harry Belafonte, and that Chick Crumpacker knew something about it. So a day or two later, Chick came into our offices and, with the help of Glenn Corman, produced this document. It was called New World A-Comin', an anthology of black music. The document leads you through, page by page, a look at the anthology of black music, telling you on a side-by-side basis what the songs are, what the songs mean, why they were organized in this way, and really gave us the blueprint for the release of this recording.
After locating the tapes, Miller, producer Al Pryor, and David Belafonte, Harry's son, who worked as an independent engineer, sat down to listen to the tapes.
Oh, come on, D. Oh, come on, D. Oh, come on, D.
Al Pryor, led by David Belafonte, did all of the work in the studios on the original tapes. We did find the original master recordings, which means the work parts, the original 2-track, 3-tracks, and 4-track recordings. They brought all of that material into the BMG studios here at 1540 Broadway in beautiful Times Square, and went through and reconstructed using the George Marek proposal, using the original tapes that we found in the vaults as a guide, and they re-engineered the recordings, not adding anything or really taking anything away, but making sure that the sonic resolution was as nice, as beautiful as it could possibly be, and that it really followed the original proposal, the original sequencing, and the original intent of the creators, including Harry Belafonte.
The production team was stunned by the sheer majesty of what they were listening to. Glenn Corman, then archives director at the BMG Vaults.
I think that you listen to all 10 sides of this thing, 5 hours of material or so, and the level of achievement throughout, I think, is astonishingly high.
I remember very clearly waiting here in Times Square in the subway system, waiting for the F train to come by to take me to my apartment in Forest Hills. And I was on side 3 of this body of work. And I had tears in my eyes, and I know that the people on the subway platform must have thought I had a really rough day at work or had some real deep personal problems, because I couldn't control my emotion.
Co-producer Al Pryor commented on how the recordings reflected a rich history, elegantly polished to become touchstones of an entire civilization, distilling 2 centuries of black musical traditions in America into 80 individual tracks.
When you hear the work songs and the songs of the Chain Gang, you hear and you begin to understand how certain aspects of history are reflected in culture, and how those elements of culture are reflected in song, and how song and music and performance helps us keep our history and helps us know who we are.
In addition to the historical aspect of the music, the decade-long series of recording sessions spanned major changes in the technologies used in the recording process.
One of the things that's interesting about this project is that it spans a lot of the history of multi-track recording. So there are recordings, initial recordings for this project that are monaural, 2-track, 3-track, 4-track, and 8-track. It actually spans the history of multi-track recording. We had to make sure that we used the kind of tape recorders, the type of setting for the heads that matched the settings that were used back in those times.
In 2000, the set was complete, the original 5 LP concept now becoming 5 CDs, with an illustrated 140-page hardbound book, essays by Belafonte, Pryor, and a DVD documentary describing the restoration process and the project's history.
When I went into the world of the Georgia Sea Islands, when I went deeply into the music of Lead Belly and the Chain Gang experience of black Americans, right then and there at that moment I said, if I ever had the opportunity and the platform to be able to expose America to this richness that it possessed and that it denied itself, that I would use my resources to bring it to the peoples of this country.
Buddha set the release date for the late summer of 2001. On launch day, Belafonte was booked to be Katie Couric's guest on NBC's Today Show. The interview ended at 8:30, and Belafonte was scheduled to meet with BMG publicists at the Windows of the World restaurant, located at the top of the North Tower of the World Trade Center. While removing his makeup and getting ready to leave the studio, Belafonte saw reports of planes crashing into the 2 towers of the Trade Center. In another half hour, he would have been there. It was September 11th, 2001. In 2002, The Long Road to Freedom earned 3 Grammy nominations amid rave reviews from critics and music historians. But any commercial hopes for it were smothered by the 9/11 tragedy. In his autobiography, Belafonte wrote, "The world had more important things to worry about that fall than boxed albums, as fine as they might be." The nearly 50-year journey from concept to release of Harry Belafonte's most important work spanned his entire public career, only to have its momentum evaporate and collapse, not unlike the Twin Towers. A quarter century later, Voices of the Belafonte Centennial Project was created to gather voices and stories as part of a year-long initiative honoring the life and legacy of Belafonte leading up to the 100th anniversary of his birth on March 1st, 2027. A series of projects is being planned which encompass education, media, community engagement, and the upcoming publication of my work, The Recordings of Harry Belafonte, which will be published by McFarland Books. Thank you very much.
We don't have time for questions and answers, but Mr. Ginell is the most accessible of historians, and you can catch him for the rest of the conference. Next, I'd like to introduce Ms. Randy Jones, who will give her own biography. Those who were here last year reveled in her discussion about Gershwin's Porgy and Bess, and I'm going to turn over the program to her.